Hey, a bombing raid and a surface action all in one. Who would have guessed? Just some Ju-88s with small payloads and a seaplane tender plus its escort though, so there's not a whole lot to worry about. Ladies, gents, and everybody in between, welcome back to the Battle of the Atlantic. We're starting off pretty much right in the same position that we ended week 8 in, with Auxiliaries right off the Norwegian coast. And as you can tell, they're currently engaged. Furious ain't looking so good, but neither is the seaplane tender down south. The destroyers were closing the distance while Furious, Shropshire and Norfolk hang back, pelting the thoroughly outclassed German duo with scathing gunfire, and before long the tender was sinking. The small auxiliary and escort did her best to fight back, but she was never going to win against any ship in my line, and before long she was torn apart. With resistance pacified, the heavy cruisers moved in to shell Bergen, but the task force was bumped by a squadron of HE-115 torpedo bombers on their way out. Naturally, these aircraft targeted the Furious, and while most of them got their payloads away, none of the torpedoes connected with the carrier, while all 4 aircraft were shot down in return. Out of the threat bubble for now, in more peaceful waters, Convoy Australia picked up supplies from Halifax, but the moment they set sail for Iceland, Auxiliaries was attacked by BF-110 fighters. To put things bluntly, these fighters suffered an embarrassing defeat at the hands of the fleet's Skuas and Gladiators. That wasn't the end of air raids though, because a squadron of Ju-88 showed up and landed 2 hits plus a dud hit on Furious. As per usual though, none of these bombs caused significant damage. Following the raid, Auxiliaries and Resup 1 made their way to Liverpool to rearm, while the submarine HMS Triton had arrived on station north of Scapa Flow on patrol duties for German shipping. Once rearmed, the carrier group picked up supplies and set sail for Iceland, but not before picking up an extra ship along the way, the light cruiser HMS Enterprise. Now, truth be told, Enterprise as a pickup meant to support Resup 1 as both a heavier escort and as an armed supply ship, but given that the latter would take time to transit to Liverpool and then back to Norway, she was temporarily attached to the carrier group. Up in Iceland proper, Convoy Wampura dropped off their supplies, passing by Task Force Gdansk in the process. While transiting the North Channel, the carrier group was attacked by a U-boat. Evading this attack, the destroyers closed in on the ambusher, with Cossack making the pass. When Cossack failed to sink the fucker, Mary made a pass. Given that the destroyers didn't have nearly the prowess in hunting submarines as HMS Aberdeen did, it took them a while to secure the kill, but eventually they nailed the bastard. Of course, this attracted the attention of the Luftwaffe, and so fighters were scrambled to intercept. A particularly dense formation of Ju-88s came from the direction of the southern French air bases, but Spitfires from Liverpool nailed them all. Nightfall passed before any other bombs were spotted, and the carrier group found its way into the Atlantic. By nightfall of the 7th, Auxiliaries arrived in Icelandic waters to drop off supplies. Now, at this point, since Resup 1 had a long way to go to pick up supplies of her own, their carrier group was relegated to ferry duties in the interim. To that point, Shropshire and Norfolk were detached and assigned to Task Force Gdansk, while Perth and Edinburgh were attached to Fury, but in the midst of all this, a German convoy showed up. The convoy in question was small and woefully unprepared to blunder into a task force of 10 ships. Initiating contact with Bliskowicz, Shropshire and Norfolk, and before long, transports were being lit up like gigantic bonfires. First, the Barenfell was sunk, then a destroyer escort was lost to a magazine explosion. Thirdly, a Cumberland, fourthly a Söderhamn, and then finally a Barenfels was blasted wide open by the detonation of her cargo. Having assisted in the destruction of yet another convoy, a shuffled Auxiliaries made way for Liverpool. Later on in the day, Aberdeen encountered more U-boats in her patrol area. As per usual, she swiftly dealt with the threat. That said, as was routine for anything in European waters, the Luftwaffe dispatched nearly every bomber squadron under its command to attack the corvette, but nighttime and the end of flight operations had them packing home before any got close. On the morning of the 9th, Resup 1 was rather bizarrely picked up by something. Suspecting U-boats, Sunderland flying boats armed with depth bombs were escorted from Scapa Flow while the supply ships entered tactical mode. Sure enough, U-boats. There was only one problem. The Kriegsmarine had somehow developed land U-boats. Luckily, because the U-boat was in the drain, it could only do harm with its AA battery, but what could harm things were the other two U-boats that made up the Wolfpack. The tanker Ajax had a ground alert encounter with torpedoes, barely evading those, but closer in, the small transport Jan Mayen was being lit up by the land boat's AA guns. Eventually, the land boat transformed back into a U-boat, where it was promptly blown open by the escorting destroyer HMS Vanity. That still left at least 2 more U-boats, so the overhead Sunderlands were directed in to help guide Vanity on target. One was spotted between Vanity and the transport Zanland, the destroyer turning around to track the target, while 2 Sunderlands were vectored in for an attack with their depth bombs. While the bombs made for a good visual spectacle, and scoring at least one hit, it failed to sink the U-boat outright, and thus Vanity closed in to finish her off. Two patterns of depth charges were enough to claim the kill, but that still left one more U-boat, which Vanity promptly tracked down and disposed of. With the U-boat sunk, Resup 1 has moved out of Scapa Flow anchorage. Down south, bombers were picked up heading over Grimsby, so the Spitfires and Hurricanes there shut down a squadron of Ju-87 Stukas and then another squadron of Do-17s, as well as an Arado scout plane that was over Grimsby for some reason. As had been expected, bombers from Bergen soon showed up virtually uncontested due to the late arrival of Folmars. In the ensuing attack, Jan Mayen and Breda were stranded by bombs, but narrowly avoided taking any direct hits. Just short of nightfall, Tarsus Fury arrived in Liverpool to pick up supplies before heading out for Iceland. However, just before night fell proper, Tarsus Gdansk picked up German scout planes in the area. Given that the cruisers were unable to launch their float planes to find the source, they moved in closer on the capital to protect it. Eventually, a convoy showed up. Entering tactical mode, it soon became apparent that it was a small force like the last 2 forces that had showed up, only this time it consisted of a pair of merchant raiders, converted transports that carried a gun and torpedo armament. In any case, the cruisers dialed in the range quickly and started tearing apart the lead ship. The trailing vessel didn't score much better. While one of them had set Bliska Witcher on fire, the second ship had become the target of both Shropshire and Norfolk. Back-to-back salvos of 8-inch and 4-inch guns crippled the merchant raider and rendered her dead in the water, ultimately contributing to her sinking first. Shifting their fire back to the leader, Tarsus Gdansk promptly finished off the already crippled merchant raider. Interestingly, while underway in the Atlantic, the carrier group hit an encounter. Sure enough, U-boats. Failing to spot anything, task force moved on. Later on in the day, Aberdeen came across her next victim, a pair of U-boats. Weaving through salvos of torpedoes, she set her sights on the target and closed in. One more to the kill tally. Having expended her depth charges, Aberdeen returned to Liverpool, but naturally every bomber squadron in Nazi-occupied Europe showed up. Apparently this also coincided with bombers stationed in Bergen attempting to hit Grimsby, but the Spitfires there made short work of the attacking Ju-88s. While Aberdeen was on her way back to rearm, she stumbled across another U-boat. However, because she was out of ammo, she simply turned away from torpedoes launched at her before continuing on course. Before anything else could happen, the end of the week rolled around. Wanting to get at least task Auxiliaries cargo offloaded on Iceland, I continued for a few minutes, offloaded supplies, and they were only carrying 900. You need 1,000 flat to upgrade to a level 2 airfield.